Imagine if each morning when you wake up, you're smiling and looking forward to your day, knowing you are happy even while you're dealing with grief and loss. The Grief and Happiness podcasts inspires, comforts, and supports you with each new episode. I'm Emily Thoreau-Threat, welcoming you to explore with me your life of endless possibilities. Aloha. I am so happy to have you here with us today. I'm joined by Carol GoldfainDavis and Marv Weidner. Weidner? I said it wrong. Tried. Marv Weidner. We are going to have an interesting conversation. This is actually the first time in almost 100 podcasts that I've done that I've had two guests on at the same time. So this will be interesting. And Carol is a counselor, is that right?
Right, yes.
A counselor who helped counsel Marv through his grief when his wife died from cancer. And together, they wrote a book that just came out in November. And I just find the whole thing fascinating. I think it's so wonderful when we can find somebody who can help support us through the grieving process. And it's not always easy to do. So I'm happy for you, Marv, that you were able to do that.
Thank you.
So can you both just give us a little description of you? Who are you and why you wrote the book together?
Sure, I can start. My dear late wife, Marty, we found out she had cancer in September 2016. Because of the diagnosis, we were able to have 9 more months together. We invited Carol into our lives toward the end of Marty's life. She passed in July of 2017. And Carol was there just during some really essential, critical parts of the last part of the time that Marty and I had together. And then Carol was my grief counselor for about 2 years after that. The book came out of the journaling I did about the cancer experience, about the grief experience, what I learned there, and then also focused very much on finding the resilience that I needed to move forward. Carol was with me through that whole process. And as I began to write the book, and it really did come together, I thought it would be valuable for anyone who has lost a loved one to hear the voice of the person who is grieving and the counselor who had helped me so much through that process. So we collaborated, and at the end of every chapter, Carol provides her perspectives as a counselor. So we have those two voices going on in the book all the time.
I love that. That's just beautiful. It kind of struck me. My husband Ron died in August of 17, so it's about the same amount of time for us. And also, I wrote my first grief book after he died as something that helped me from my journaling and things that I went through. So we have a lot in common here. Mm-hmm. So, Carol, what would you like to tell us, Carol?
Well, it does sound a little bit similar. Both of your stories, yours and Marv's. It was at first I thought, well, you can't just share all these personal, private things. I don't want to give up any confidentiality, But it was an absolutely fabulous experience because Marv is so open and vulnerable and shared everything that needed sharing, I think, on his own. So I could keep that objective viewpoint and just talk about what he was experiencing. And whatever people are going through as they read this, maybe if they're experiencing that, they will hear some words of, well, here's something you might try. So that was my role, was basically just to support Marv, really. And, if we needed to make sense of something that he was talking about that someone might be confused on, that was kind of what I got to do, which was a huge privilege. But it was amazing because you develop even more of a knowledge of each other and of what that experience was like for him to experience the loss of somebody so special. So it's kind of a once in a lifetime thing. Haven't done that before. So it was good. I think basically I realized that Marv was the one to tell the story. He was the one to share those actually very intimate details on several occasions. And I didn't have to divulge any confidentiality, which was my primary concern in the very beginning. That didn't last very long, for my concern was not there, because we began to steer towards, if he shared an experience, I would just talk about it from more of an objective counselor's viewpoint to explain what was happening or what maybe someone could do if they found themselves in that same kind of a predicament or situation. So that was my role, was to support him.
That's so wonderful to be able to do that through this whole process. Marv, you're so fortunate to have had that kind of experience. I know I have found that hearing other people's experiences helps normalize what I say, the things that happen, because so many times we think we're the only one, or nothing like that ever happened to anybody else, because people just don't talk about it generally. And when we can, it makes a difference. I know in my book, I invited a lot of people that I know to contribute little experiences here and there that related to whatever I was talking about in a particular chapter. And some people adamantly didn't want to have anything to do with it, and other people really got into it. And I think it was really helpful for them in the process to do too. But it also gave my book a broader perspective, so people could see that just because one person experiences something doesn't mean somebody else will experience the same thing.
Right. And I think there's something about, if you hear a story, this is sort of a thought that I began to have as Marv continued to write, and I would respond to him. If you hear something that is just kind of gives you a little bit of a glimpse into the future, perhaps, of an idea of, oh, maybe I could do that. Maybe that would help me too. Or that you can get through that situation, and as they hear that, I think you're right. I think that does normalize what they're feeling and kind of gives them a little, oh, good, I have a little heads up. Maybe I can do this after all.
And I think that's true. Ram Dass was from Maui, and I think the last book that he wrote, or one of the last books that he wrote, was Walking Each Other Home. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's kind of what we're doing here, is supporting each other on the journey. Because from the time we're born, we're on the journey. We don't concentrate on it a whole lot, but we're all going to get there someday.
Yeah.
So, Marv, what did you learn in the process of writing? Was it that we could kind of take that into two sections? One, the process of journaling during the process, and then after that, the process of actually putting the book together.
What I learned through the journaling was a reinforcement of the notion that I had to begin with, which was to fully embrace whatever it was I was feeling, and to embrace it at the time I was feeling it. And the journaling helped me do that. For my experience, it was critical to the healing process to embrace whatever feelings were coming up at the time they came up, rather than set them aside or defer them or believe that I could go back to them later, which turned out not to be true. If I tried to go back to a feeling that I had, it was more of an intellectual exercise than a truly deep and emotional, experience. So the writing in the journal really emerged into the book really almost seamlessly, because I was writing about the experiences that I had, what I learned, the observations that I had made. And doing this with Carol was really a continuation of the healing process for me, Emily. And being able to express it and then have Carol really put her words of wisdom to it was really kind of a completion of a circle or a cycle for me. I found in my writing, I started to say what I thought maybe someone else might do. And I really realized quickly that I wasn't qualified to do that. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a grief counselor. I'm a grieving husband. And I could tell my stories and the perspective that I had and what I was learning, which was just fast-paced insights and understanding that was coming through the writing. But I really wanted to stop short of giving people advice. That's what Carol had done for me throughout the whole grieving process. So engaging her wisdom and her perspective was really what I thought was the best thing I could do for the readers that I was trying to help.
That's beautiful. And a lot of people either don't have the resources or don't think they have the resources to actually get a grief counselor. And a lot of times it's kind of a challenge to find a grief counselor.
Right.
I've had a couple of people tell me of experiences that were kind of sad, where they go to one of them was talking about going to a grief counselor who'd just gotten out of college and didn't have anybody she ever knew die. Mm. And she said she just couldn't relate to her. They couldn't talk about the same things. And she thought that the counselor was judging her. And she just said, I had to get out of there. So it's wonderful when you can find a good fit. And there are lots of good fits out there. There are wonderful counselors. So if you have an experience that isn't what you want and you still want a counselor, keep trying. And talk to other people, that live in the area where you would be looking for a grief counselor, and find out about experiences other people have had so that you can get an idea of who to go to instead of just blindly choosing one off of a list.
Right. And I think, Emily, our book brings forward the value of the relationship for me. I have told Carol, probably to her embarrassment at times, that she literally saved my life, that I probably wouldn't be here, and certainly wouldn't be here and be in a position to move forward with my life if I hadn't had that experience with Carol, if she had not provided that very safe place for me to express and explore what I was experiencing, what I was feeling, and what I wondered, the questions that I had. And being able to talk to Carol, through those 2 years following Marty's passing, were just essential to me being able to move forward with my life, find the healing that was so much what my soul and my body needed. So I would really encourage anyone who's lost a loved one or who's experienced a devastating loss to consider talking with a grief counselor. And my hope would be is that you find one as wise and caring as Carol.
That's what can you say, Carol, in response to that?
Way too complimentary.
Oh, no, I don't think so.
No.
But the process was an equal learning experience for me as well, because we were walking together on this path. Nobody really knows what the next day is going to be like, but we experienced that together as we talked and shared. I love what you said about having someone that's just come out of college, or you bump into some grief group, and hospice offers those for free, and they are available in a lot of different community centers or maybe churches, that kind of thing. So that's a good place to go. But I think my thought was, when you said that, is I just want to tell people, I want to apologize for what happens out there that isn't helpful. And then just say, don't give up, because it's like anything. Well, a lot of our whole medical community is really just, well, that didn't work, so let's try something else. Now that didn't work either, so let's down the dose, or whatever is an experimental kind of a situation. So I would just say, don't give up. Just keep, breathe deeply and call one more person and see if you click. And probably within 10, 15 minutes, I think, of talking to someone, I think I can click with this person, and I feel comfortable. I could say just about anything, which is what you need to be able to. So I would just say, don't give up.
Yeah,
really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know after Ron died, I had 2 husbands die, and Ron was the one who died here on Maui. And I didn't really want to go to a grief group, but I had only been here for the last 2 years of his life with him, and we spent all that time together as he was needing to be together. And that was really great. And so I found myself without knowing a whole lot of people. And I got invited to a couple of groups, and I kind of talked to the people involved, and I thought, I can't do this. I don't want to go someplace and sit and listen to the same people cry about the same story every week. Not that all grief groups are that way, but there are some that are, and the one that I was looking into was that way. So I thought, well, I'm just not going to go someplace. And then somebody else asked me to a grief cafe, and I had no idea what that was, but I went, and I was so glad I did. It was, they held it at a Mexican restaurant, which there aren't very many of on Maui. But we all went to the Mexican restaurant. We had nachos, and some had margaritas and beer. And we just sat around the table, and everybody shared about who they were and why they were there. And some people weren't dealing with grief at that moment, but they were interested in the subject, and they were interested in the death and dying process and talking about the death and dying process, while others wanted to share about their grief. And it was a wide variety of ages too, which I really liked. And I clicked with two of the women that were there, that both were younger than I am. Of course, they thought I was younger too, but we had just a great conversation, and we ended up being able to connect afterwards. And I was so glad that I went, because though it wasn't a formal counseling situation, it was someplace where I could not be concerned about sharing what I wanted to about what I had gone through or what I was going through. And it was very good for me to listen to what the other people were going through and learn from their experience.
I think, Marv, you could probably talk about that topic of finding what we called your tribe. And those are the people that they just get it. They are into that topic, or they know someone that is, or they've experienced it themselves. And those are the ones you begin to bond with, right? And I think, and then, of course, Marv, there was a lot of others that you experienced that didn't have a clue what this was like, or what to say, or what to do. And that's most of us in an unusual situation in our culture, for sure. We're not real comfortable with the topics of pain in other people's lives, but you should say something about that, Marv. I think that's a good thing for you.
I was more than fortunate, because my family was very supportive, particularly my son. I was surrounded by a group of friends, both near and far, that were very, very good, very centered and calm about letting me be myself, letting me be as I was, during that time. And since what Carol is also referring to is that some of the things that people say to you when you're grieving can be jarring, maybe even insensitive, and certainly without understanding of what the experience is like. And it takes a bit to get back out into public, knowing that sometimes people are going to say things to you that, when they ask, how are you doing? And I want to say, well, do you have a couple, 3 hours? I can tell you how I'm doing. Or say, I know how you feel. I lost my dog last year, and just all the things that people say. There's a whole chapter about how our culture deals or doesn't deal effectively with loss, or know what to say or how to communicate about it. There's almost a culture of silence about death and about dying in our culture, and it's pretty difficult when you are the person who's experienced a loss to bump up against that. It's almost like, as Carol said, people don't really want you to talk about what you're experiencing, because for a lot of reasons they don't want to deal with death and dying themselves, let alone someone else's. But there are certainly places like the Grief Cafe you mentioned, like the friends I had, like Carol, where you can seek out and find a place where it's safe, where it's accepted, and where what you're experiencing is affirmed and supported. So it's very important to find that place and to find that tribe.
It is. I wholly agree with you on that. And it's important to have people that you're kind of, I guess I'd say, up to date with, so that they don't have that constant question of how are you? I found out, I discovered that so many people ask that question of me that each time I'd hear it, it was more difficult than the time before. And I would just kind of choke up, and it's like, okay, what is it that you're asking? What do you want to hear? And it was hard. That was a really hard question. So I came to start saying, I'm doing the best I can. And that's what I answered every time after that.
Very good response.
And yeah, it made me feel better too, because they got to ask the question that they wanted to, and I didn't have to do the work, to figure it out, what it was that they were really asking or what they really wanted to know. And it worked really well. So yeah, if you can find something like that, that can really help.
As Carol would coach me during those times, she said, they just want to fix you.
Mm-hmm.
Just they intend well for the most part, and they just are trying to make you feel better or be better, and that's just not possible.
Yeah, they just know that you can get married again, so don't worry about it.
Right.
If people would just turn the tables and think what they'd feel like if somebody said something like that to them.
Right.
But they don't. They're not thinking in that frame of reference, and I don't think they mean any harm. They're trying to be supportive.
I agree. We just, as a culture, have not really gained the skills broadly on how to do that, even though we're all going to experience loss if we live long enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of a death-defying culture we live in some ways.
Yeah. It's supposed, defying, yes, or just ignoring, whatever we can do to not talk about that subject.
Right.
That's where a lot of people are. They just can't handle it.
And like you, I'm sure, Emily, with your book, part of the hope that Carol and I have is that the book will help people find ways to talk about it, find ways to embrace the experience, embrace the process of grieving, so that they can find a way to heal, find a way to move forward. And not move on, but move forward.
That's right. That's exactly what I tell people, that moving forward, it makes a huge difference to look at it as moving forward instead of moving on. Because I always tell people when they ask me how long you're supposed to grieve, I say, I'm going to grieve my husbands for the rest of my life. They're always still in my heart. You don't just give that up and put it away on a shelf. It's just part of the life process.
It's part of who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, very much so.
Well, it just made me think we like to be so orderly and scientific, and we have a certain number of things that have to be done, and then you get to this. Now you get to go to third grade because you did all the second grade things.
Yeah.
And we kind of want to apply that, but it doesn't quite work out that way. But we like that, or I think it just gives us that sense of control, which of course you don't have.
Yes.
Kind of an illusion we like to believe in.
Yeah, people want to graduate from grief. Yeah. I know there's a couple programs out there where you're supposed to go through a process, and when you get through the process, then you can go on with your life. And that might work for some people, and I'm glad if it does, that they have that available to them. But I know that's not what would work for me, because that's just not how I'm made. So I think it's nice to have a variety of things available so that you can get what's most significant for you, what's going to work best for you. I want to know where the name of your book came from. What's the meaning of the name of your book?
When the Rocks Sing.
Mm-hmm.
It came from a moment about 6 months after Marty passed, when I was on a beach in New Zealand. I called the trip my Resiliency tour because I knew I needed to get myself back out there. So I went to a part of the world where I didn't know anyone, where I'd never been before. I was walking on a beach near a place called Greymouth, which is on the South Island. And I walked the beach for about 3 days. Somewhere in the middle part of that, I was aware that the rocks on the beach would chatter against each other as the waves, came in, and then as the wave went back out and washed over the top of the rocks, they would chatter to get against each other. And it took almost 2 days for me to actually realize that was happening. And the name of the book is really wishing others who have experienced loss that they too will come to a place when their heart is quiet and open enough and their mind is calm enough to actually hear the sounds of nature again. And it was a moment for me where, I found I was still in love with life and really wanted to move forward. So When the Rocks Sing.
That is so beautiful. It's such an important thing to consider. I know lots of people that I've talked to when they're grieving won't leave their homes.
Right.
They just can't seem to get up and get to move at all. And I know I found more comfort in nature than probably anything else. To be able to, being able to walk and see and listen. And one of the things that brings me comfort is going out in the mornings, because there are so many birds, the different birds with different bird songs, and to go out and sit and just listen to my birds in the morning. It's just, I feel like I'm surrounded by people that are singing to comfort me, to support me.
You can feel immersed in life and immersed in the world again.
Mm-hmm.
I found it to be very important, very healing.
And I like the idea of your resilience tour. I think that that's something people need to do too, is put themselves in a totally different place if they can, and see what happens. Just experience what you experienced then, where you're not only surrounded by people that know that you just are suffering loss and that don't know what to say to you or talk to you. I ended up doing that. I didn't really plan to do it, but I had I do ceramic sculpture. I really love ceramics, and I belong to I get a magazine, a ceramics magazine, that talks about different things. And in the back, they've got these places listed where you can go and stay and study ceramics. And I had found that long before Ron died. And I thought that would be really cool to go there. And I just never thought I would. It was in Tuscany, but it seemed like every time I picked up the magazine, I saw something about it. Well, after Ron died, I picked up the magazine and I noticed that they had a ceramics tour to Tuscany, where they were going to go to an international ceramics show and some ceramics museums and places where they did lots of things with ceramic mosaic, especially, and throughout Tuscany. And then you would also go to different studios and learn different techniques while you were there. And so I signed up. And I thought, it's traveling for me from where I live halfway around the world by myself. And just doing this, at least there would be people there. I didn't know anybody that would be there, but I knew there would be people I could relate to. And I knew that none of them knew that my husband died. And I was able to go and kind of escape there. And it was fabulous. And one of the really interesting things is one of the studios that we ended up spending 3 days at working at that studio was that studio that I'd seen years before and said, I really want to go there. And it just happened to be part of the tour. So it was so healing. There's so much beauty in Tuscany and so many different things. And the act of putting myself outside of where everybody knew me, it made just a huge difference to me. And I really am glad I did that. I ended up going on another tour with them to Bali, and it was the same sort of experience where with something that I wouldn't have gotten any other way. It's not like you're going as a tourist where you just kind of walk around and entertain yourself, but it's you go for a purpose. That's what I liked in it, was I went for a purpose and something that I could really relate to. So I like the idea of calling that your resilience tour. That I think that would be a great thing for people to recognize and do for themselves.
Yeah, you were very intentional, Marv. Like to even give it a title was a fabulous thing, because it focused him on, okay, wait, I'm here because, and it helped you focus. And I think you had an opportunity to share with people when you were on that trip, maybe very much like Emily did, too, about how your life had meaning.
Very much so. I really did rediscover my life purpose on that trip. When you put yourself in a situation like that, you kind of have to open your heart and mind to what you're experiencing and the people that you encounter, none of whom I had ever met before, of course. It was halfway around the world, just as your experience was in Tuscany. And it was very powerful. I mean, I really came to this important life is to live with an open heart, because that's what I experienced on that tour, which was very consistent with how Marty and I had lived our lives as well. But it was a dynamic part of the healing process, and Carol was very encouraging, which went a long way to help me get out the door and go.
It's sort of like pushing through a brick wall, don't you feel like, kind of?
That's right.
It's like, you just have to do that and know that it's kind of hard, and then you're out there. So maybe it's that movement of just take 3 steps. Well, maybe here, because it's snowing here today, for all of you in warmer places, you have to put on your boots and your coat so you have some prep, but just get out there and then just take a breath, and you've kind of done the hardest part.
That's really true. Marv, you said something that I hear from a lot of people in grief, maybe not right away, but as they go forward in their grief, people tend to discover that they don't know what their purpose is now, that they felt like they did before, and they want to know what their purpose is in life. How was that for you?
Well, it was very real for me. I identified it fairly early on. I would say sort of in the 4 to 5 months time frame, that my primary purpose in life had been to be the best husband to Marty that I possibly could. And that certainly had intensified during those 9 months when, she was sick from the cancer and going through lots of treatments, and I was taking care of her, 24/7. But I realized how sort of empty I felt after she passed. And part of that emptiness was that purpose had just basically gone away. And so knowing that was gone, but identifying what it was going forward is quite another thing. And the trip to New Zealand, and I subsequently took a number of trips to sort of reinforce and rediscover and deepen my sense of being in the world again, really was foundational to me to find that purpose within myself. And for me, it was not doing something necessarily out in the world, although, being of service to others and building and focusing on my relationships was certainly, fundamental to who I wanted to be and wanted to continue to be in the world. But finding that core statement, if you will, for me, which was to live with an open heart, was really important to my healing, important to regenerating the resilience that it took for me to continue to move forward with life. So it was a very, very fundamental, foundational trip and experience.
That's so wonderful. I really hope that people will hear that. And it's wonderful to be able to go on a trip like Marv and I got to go on. And I realize not everybody can do that, but there is something that you can do, that you can find a way, even if it's going to the park and sitting on a park bench, and being in a different space. Yes. Where you can have a freshness of that space to be able to see things differently than you have before, because your world's different than it was before.
A different space and different place really, was very stimulative to me and to my thought process. And because I love nature and have always found my center in nature, that's where I went. But I agree that just giving yourself a different place and a different perspective was for me very, very fun, fundamental. Carol, do you have something to add to that?
Well, I was just thinking, as you were talking, I'm sort of thinking about the calming effect of nature, really. Just even if you're just outside your front door, I mean, you don't have to go far, but you're kind of in a different place. And go over by that tree over there and just touch it and spend time there. And if it's summer, put your feet in the grass. There's a lot of grounding just to be against the earth and just let it fill you and feel the sunshine on you. If you're in the winter, bundle up and feel that cold air on your face. And just, I think there's just a lot of energy in that. So, and healing, it is very healing. And it's kind of funny because I know when we have difficult times, if I just say, I just need to get out, take a little walk, doesn't have to be long, but just being outside does something for our spirit. It really lifts us. And I don't know that I completely understand all of that and why, but it does. So.
Yeah, you made me think about one of the things that I did was visit someone who lived in a big city on the mainland that had lots of art galleries. And the person I was visiting was at work all day long every day, and we just got to be together like in the evenings. So I would go to a different art gallery or 2 or 3 every day. And being in that sort of very creative atmosphere where everybody sees something different in everything that they were looking at. And I could just sit peacefully. And one of them was it didn't have, what was in it was more abstract. So it wasn't like you could look at it and go, oh, that looks like this place or something. But it was being around that creativity and that beauty and walking through it. Some of them were art installations where it would be a whole room where you would walk through the art. And that was it was a different experience for me that was very healing for me too. It also got me to the point where I ended up learning how to draw when I got home. I always thought I couldn't, but I found a class at the local art center here and took it and was amazed that I actually could draw and have loved it ever since. And that drawing, the process of drawing, has been very therapeutic for me.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot to be said for drawing. I think it taps into a different part of your thinking and emotions. And I don't know if I ever told you, Marv, but when you were writing and journaling, did I ever say write with your left hand? Because sometimes if you change hands, it's going to be a mess and nobody cares about that. But something different can come out. So I don't know, that's kind of a quirky little side note to art. Yeah, art therapy is a fabulous thing. There are a lot of grief art therapists. So
yeah, they're wonderful. I've interviewed some of them and taken a couple of classes before I did the podcast so that I could get the experience and feel what it was. And I highly recommend art therapy. I think it's just a great thing to do to deal with grief. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, and I'm sure people are going to have a lot to think about when they listen to this. So I'm very grateful you both are here. Do you have any last words you want to say?
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to be on your podcast, to share. The purpose of the book is certainly to help those who have lost loved ones, maybe identify with my story or gain some insights from Carol's perspective. So we really appreciate the opportunity, Emily.
Yeah. Thanks for the work you're doing, Emily. It's really important. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And to our listeners, I am sure that you enjoyed today's episode, and it'll give you a lot to think about and even do. And I look forward to seeing you again next week. Do you want more comfort, support, and happiness? Join the Grief and Happiness Alliance. Visit my website at lovingandlivingyourwaythroughgrief.com and read my book, Loving and Living Your Way Through Grief. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast, rate it, review it, and binge on all our episodes on grief and happiness. I can't wait to welcome you back to another episode